So that's everything from ITI. So now moving on to the Regulatory Performance Committee. Options to support the relocation of street-based sex workers to address residents' concerns, item 19. And Dave, I'll come to you to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, this has been an incredibly sensitive, sometimes quite divisive and a difficult situation to resolve. I'd like to acknowledge the difficulties that the local residents have had to endure. However, Council have engaged with the local residents on the basis for a bylaw development, on the basis that the police supported and would enforce the bylaw. However, developing a bylaw to regulate the location of street-based sex workers is quite legally complex and under the current legislative framework. This is largely due to the limited enforcement tools available under the Local Government Act 2002 in respect to general bylaw making powers. I believe we still need to show a positive reinforcement and a commitment to the people in this area. And as part of this recommendation before you today, there is the development of a multi-agency community reference group to explore options and actions going forward. The police have advised that they are unable under the current legislative framework to be able to enforce any bylaw that we created. But I really would like to encourage the police to have an intensive presence in this area to discourage the activity north of Beeley Ave. We have made some minor changes to the staff recommendation. We have not precluded creating a bylaw in the future. We've inserted the words "at this stage," and should the legislative provisions around bylaw enforcement change in the future, well, it may be an option that we could consider again. We've amended clause 5 to ask for quarterly reports on the progress of work with this community reference group to come back to us, back to the Regulatory Compliance Committee. And in clause 6 we've added a provision asking that Council would consider funding initiatives that have been presented by this collaborative community working group to be considered. So the excuse me, the recommendation is there before you. I think it's reasonably self-explanatory. As I said, it's been an extremely difficult situation to try and come to some resolve with. We have a community that's extremely frustrated and annoyed at the activity that is continuing in this area, and unfortunately a bylaw at this stage is not able to give the police the powers to enact it and make it effective. And I've said on many occasions there's no point in having a bylaw if we can't enforce it, and that's essentially where we've come to today. It doesn't leave the residents with much comfort, and that's why I'm saying that we as a council, I think, still need to be showing some positive reinforcement in terms of commitment to activities that we can pursue to address the problem in this area. And as I said earlier, I really do encourage the police to take a really intensive presence in the area to actively discourage the activity further. I'm happy to defer to the team up the front for any questions that may arise.
All right, so thanks, Dave, for that introduction. I mean, clearly there's been some, this has come here to council before, there's clearly been some extensive debate and work done at the committee, and thanks for detailing that to us. We've got staff at the table. Are there any questions for staff on the report that's in front of us? So Dion, and then Pauline, and then Glenn.
What is the reason that we can't make a bylaw?
We could make a bylaw, but it's about whether the bylaw will be workable and enforceable. And because the only bylaw making power that we can use is the general bylaw making power in the Local Government Act, the only enforcement tool available in that Act is, for that bylaw making power, is prosecution, and that's extremely difficult in a workable sense for this issue.
So under the Prostitution Reform Act 2003 in section 14, bylaws regulating location of brothels, if that part of the legislation actually mentioned street-based sex workers, could we create a bylaw that would be enforceable?
An amendment to the Prostitution Reform Act with a new bylaw making power that specifically looked at regulating street-based sex work and had requisite appropriate enforcement powers for the police would be very helpful in this case, but without that, the legislation as it currently stands doesn't allow us to do a workable bylaw.
I'd like to actually put an amendment into this and actually see if we can work with the government to what was the word we said? Request a review of the Prostitution Reform Act to look at street-based sex work, because at the time when it was taken out, when the Prostitution Reform Act was done in 2003, it actually talked and said they didn't put street-based sex work in, but they will look at it if it became a problem.
I just wonder, as a point of order, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
maybe through debate's a good time to be doing the amendments.
Well, last time I tried to do that, I got
I'm aware
shut down.
that so in terms of process, we're talking about an amendment to a resolution that hasn't yet been moved or seconded. So, Dion, are you suggesting that you would like to be the mover of this, but in an amended form?
No.
So you're going to wait till somebody moves and seconds what's in front of us, and you're signalling that at that time you'd like to move an amendment.
Yep.
So can you work on the wording of what you want that amendment to be, so that we can debate it at that time? Yep. So if you work on the wording of the amendment that you may choose to put, once this has been moved and seconded by others, because you're not wanting to move it, we'll then deal with that amendment at that time, rather than debating an amendment now which hasn't been put to a resolution which has neither been moved nor seconded. Okay, let's now move to the next question, which is Pauline's.
Yep. Now, thank you. Look, just when this has been, a lot of really lengthy and complex process, but when the council resolved earlier this year to investigate a bylaw, a regulatory approach in parallel with a non-regulatory approach. At that point, we believed that we had the support of the police to assist us in enforcing a bylaw if that was to be implemented. And during the course of the working groups, we discovered that that support was no longer available. For whatever reason the police had, and I think partly it was resourcing, but partly the challenges of actually enforcing that. So have I got that correct?
You have.
So would that situation still exist if we went down Dion's avenue there as well? If
an amendment to the Prostitution Reform Act included a new bylaw making power and it involved related enforcement powers that specifically empowered the police, then that would be a workable situation. The example we have is probably the alcohol in public places bylaw under section 147 of the Local Government Act. So that's a bylaw, but it has specific enforcement powers that allow the police to issue instant fines and to arrest people for breaching that particular bylaw. So if there were appropriate enforcement powers, then that would change the situation.
There's two reasons why the police are unable to really commit to enforcing a bylaw with the street-based sex workers, and that is because garnering the evidence. It's not like someone just standing around being drunk in public. So that would still exist.
If there's different legislation in place, and then different rules about evidence gathering would apply. And in 2012, when the council submitted on the Manukau bill about regulation of street prostitution, the first submission that the council made was not strictly on the bill. It was asking the Select Committee to recommend amendments to the Prostitution Law Reform Act, not to provide the council with bylaw making powers, but to provide for legislative controls for street-based sex workers that could be appropriately enforced and that would appropriately recognise the health and safety issues for the workers, and the submission also pointed to the fact that the focus of legislation in other areas was on the client rather than the sexual services provider. So there is some groundwork, if you like, that the council's already done back in 2012 that we can build, if there's a desire to approach the government again about amendments to that act, there is some groundwork already that's being done by the council, but not with a focus on giving council bylaw making powers, just about sort of
legislation,
not involving the council, having legislation that deals with street-based sex workers that police can enforce directly.
Well, that's interesting, thank you. And just secondly, in the non-regulatory approach, out of the working group, we have actually expanded the working group. Is it called a working group? No, the working group, that partnership that will continue. So can you tell me who else we've got on board there that we didn't have before?
It's a work in progress, so it's developing and changing day by day at the moment, so it's in the process of being set up, so it's not established yet. They're looking at including other groups that are active in the central city anyway, a number of different church groups, and Department of Corrections, whether there's any options there for people that might be on remand and whether any other legal tools could be used there. Of course, it includes already the police, the Prostitutes Collective, Youth and Cultural Development and Salvation Army, Community and Public Health. So there's a number of other NGOs or government agencies or other bodies that will be involved in that, as well as, of course, the residents in both areas, in a sense, because one issue is the people north of Believ who are wanting to move the prostitutes down to the central city area, and also the residents in the central city area that may be impacted by that change. So it's both sides of that.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got Glenn, Mike, Phil and Sarah. So Glenn.
Okay, thank you. At one point we were talking perhaps 11 or 16 workers at its peak. I think now 2. Has there been a change in the last couple of weeks since the committee met?
My understanding at the moment, the numbers fluctuate all the time, day of the week, weather, everything else, but there have been up to 4 operating in the particular area of concern. Yeah. At its height, the number of around 16 was some time ago now, and numbers have been declining quite a bit, particularly in the last 6 months. There's been a lot of work done by the outreach workers, so that's those 3 NGOs who have been forming relationships and talking with the street-based sex workers. Initially, they were trying to work on behaviour while the workers were located in that area, but more recently they've been trying to encourage them to move out of the area, and that has been largely successful for most people. Okay,
and entirely different question. Do you know that, is there an appetite in the collective to seek legislative change from the view of affording greater protection to those working on the street than there is now, to with an end that it might actually serve to address what we're trying to address here, but also provide greater protection? And we note since the introduction of that Act, there have been several high profile murders, so we would want greater protection for those working.
Not to speak on behalf of the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, but I would say that they are, as an advocacy group for street-based sex workers and sex workers generally, they are interested in anything that would improve and assist with health and safety for their workers, but they are opposed to regulation that may inadvertently mean that this situation is more dangerous. For example, anything that seeks to push street-based sex workers in effect underground or out of sight, out of mind, can lead to a lot of safety issues for them. So in a lot of places where regulation has been proposed, they've been quite strongly against it because they're concerned that it could inadvertently increase the danger for the workers.
Right, okay. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. So obviously a lot of the issues we've heard from residents is obviously about the nuisance caused that they see is caused from the sex workers, which could happen across the whole city for various reasons, not just sex workers. So is there currently any bylaws or legislation around that nuisance in general?
There's a range of different things covered by legislation more generally, mostly in the Summary Offences Act, but a lot of those, though they are there in primary legislation, they can be difficult to enforce because often situations need to be witnessed as things are occurring. In terms of things like yelling and noise and voice noise and vehicle noise, they're not covered particularly well, but a range of issues that have been identified throughout these reports and by residents as occurring are covered by a number of pieces of legislation.
So we've actually got the tools in place. It's just that I guess the police aren't able to enforce what is there already.
Yeah, there are difficulties around enforcing, including resourcing. Being there at the time to witness offences happening is probably the biggest issue. We can find the remnants of the activities, such as discarded syringes or condoms or whatever, but actually tagging that to a person and being able to charge something is the difficulty.
So it's actually just looking at if this is an issue that's ongoing, police resources and actually going to that direction and actually creating a bylaw that we don't need.
One of the reasons why we think the collaborative partnership approach would be a good approach is that it's about building relationships and talking with people and affecting culture change. So that can have more of an impact than just attempting to come down on people.
Thank you. So now I've got Phil, Sarah, Anne and Tim. So Phil.
So look, I'm pleased to hear that the outreach workers have made some impact on shifting this away from the area of most concern. But I'm just wondering about, are there enough resources there to actually support the creation of the collaborative community group? Because I had understood that in fact that was also underway. So just wondering have there been enough resources around that?
At the moment, it's staff time is the resource that we've been using. There is a recommendation that was moved at the committee around funding for any future work that the partnership undertakes. So the partnership is intended to be driven by the community, so we haven't set out too much about what that might involve or what may be worthwhile pursuing. So in that sense, the costs of those actions that the partnership might take are not yet known.
I'm just wondering too, is it possible that because in fact there was it was sort of like a bit of a dichotomy, there was the previous council decision was to ask staff to look at the legislative possibilities and also to look at ways of supporting the sex workers. So I'm just wondering in fact if the whole process has become diluted by the focus on the regulatory approach.
Some of us have been focused on the regulatory approach and others in our team have been focused on the partnership approach, which has been going alongside this approach.
Yes, it just seems that we haven't made great progress to date, and I'm just wondering, in fact, will more legislation really assist this problem?
We're hoping that the community partnership will be helpful and come up with options which will see a useful impact to help move people to an area that's less problematic.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Sarah, Anne and then Tim. Sarah.
Thank you. Phil's question asked most of what I was going to ask, but just leading on, the three resolutions that we had originally from the 25th of May, the continuing to work with relevant agencies and residents, the working group, the interagency group representatives, and then the work on the bylaw. And would it be fair to say that the work on the bylaw actually took up quite a lot of time of the interagency group, all of those people, and that was the key focus of the group rather than the other addressing the issue stuff? It was sort of focused on the bylaw rather than the other stuff?
It was, and also because we were delivering on that council resolution, but also because it wasn't until the completion of that project that the police confirmed their view as not supporting a bylaw. So a lot of our energy at that time did, but since that was confirmed some weeks ago now, there's been a lot more time to focus on the non-regulatory partnership development.
Yeah, and so the last 2 weeks since that's been confirmed by the police, there's been some progress quite quickly?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Meetings are being set up, but these things do take time, but they're progressing.
Thank you.
Anne and then Tim.
Thank you. A couple of questions in terms of the rubbish and the evidence of the activity. So I'm imagining that some resource could be put towards having staff there to clean up. That was, I believe, part of the discussion. Is that something that you're considering?
Yes, there are a number of different options there around additional rubbish bins or repositioning existing rubbish bins, changing the frequency of street cleaning. We're also looking at siting a sharps disposal or medical disposal bin that's accessible to the workers in south of Manchester, south of Beeley Ave. So that could assist as well. But some of that will hopefully come out through the partnership because the people involved in that are aware of where the specific problems are and what's occurring. So we're hoping that will have an impact.
Great, thank you. And in terms of involving the residents in the working party, how does that look? What kind of what sort of action would be involved for them, and what would their involvement look like?
It depends on what they want it to look like, really. The point of this is that it...
Oops. Just take a pause.
Is everything all right? Okay.
Just a wee faint.
Really?
Everyone look away. Yeah. Just
okay. Let's continue as we were, assuming everything really is okay. Yeah, it looks like we are. Okay.
So the residents' level of involvement will depend on what the residents would like it to be. One important part is that it provides an easy step conduit of information if they're having particular issues or trouble, that they can go and talk to the partnership, so it should be more accessible. I think it has been difficult in the past having a specific person or group or place to go within the big organisation of council to get concerns addressed, so this is a way of making that happen. So the beginnings of reaching out to those residents and getting people together has been happening in the background.
Great. And final question, would it be helpful to have any kind of indication of what kind of financial resource you need at this point, and what we could and how we could support you?
We don't have that yet. The focus and view of this collaborative partnership approach is that it's driven from the bottom up, not from the top down. So we haven't been prescriptive in what issues the partnership will look at or what might be helpful. So I suspect that some of that will come along in the recommendation to report back to the committee quarterly. I suspect that issues as they're identified and can be scoped will come to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess for me, I think there are two issues here, aren't there? One is a more appropriate place and a safer place for the street workers, which, I mean, it's a fact. They're not going to go away. That they are a fact of life here. But with any face-to-face transaction which a business needs face-to-face, if your client can't get to you, you've got to shift. So I'm just wondering, rather than looking at a bylaw with regards to respect to sex work, on-street sex workers, which has been made very clear that it's not supported and won't be supported, with regards to the limiting of vehicles on a street, because Manchester Street is a dead end when it comes to when it comes to Edgware. It has Sherborne Street to the west. So where we have the restricted vehicles with regards to the inland port and Port Hills Road and Hazeldean Road and many other areas around the airport, etc. So if you made it impossible for the client to get to the product, therefore the product has to move. So if we actually had better foresight and better vision, well, you know, maybe we would have planned and done something better in town and close to the city on Manchester Street where they traditionally have worked. But just in the short term, because this is really what we're talking, because hopefully there will be plans to make a better and safer environment for them to work, could we do that? Because we have residents that are being put out, there's a community that's being affected, and realistically to date nothing has worked and nothing is proposed to work. We can talk about reductions, etc., but on a bad night it's irrelevant what's happening. A bad night for those residents is a bad night. So the question is, have we thought about another way to do this, which would be, it's highly effective on Hazeldean Road. We know that from the businesses that have been recovered from their costs, if you like. We know that it's worked around the inland port on Port Hills Road, off Port Hills Road. So could that work here? Because Edgware Road is a dead end.
It's certainly something that has been looked at through this process. We've looked at a number of things around no stopping lines or no stopping standing parking signs. There are issues around enforcement. This activity happens late at night. There are issues around safety for enforcement as well. You're absolutely right, the traffic flow has an impact, and that's one of the reasons why we have been hearing that the sex workers have moved north, is partly because of roadworks that's been happening in the central city that's been stopping the through flow of traffic. There are other physical barriers that you could put in place. You could build out the corners so that you physically can't stop there, as opposed to painting yellow lines or having some other enforceable tool. We need to look at the basis for which those tools can be put in place, whether they can be put in place for this particular issue or whether they're related to traffic flow or traffic safety or other issues. So we need to use the tools carefully and appropriately, but it will be looked at.
My understanding.
Jump in there, Tim, and help to answer, because the old Shuri Papanui Community Board attempted this, and we looked at bringing in no stopping lines all the way down, all sorts of things, closing streets off, everything. But you come to a dead end, excuse the pun, because anything you do like that, you need to consult. And as soon as you go out to consult, you get all the other streets around saying, well, hang on, you're moving them from Manchester to Bishop Street, or you're moving from Manchester to Shoeboard, how dare you? So it opens up this whole raft of objections, and it would prove costly to consult and difficult to actually get that through. So we did try that maybe 2 years ago. So, yeah.
I guess that's why I was saying it's kind of a two-pronged thing. One is to supply an area that is safer and perhaps more traditional, as in closer on Manchester Street, because let's face it, Manchester Street has traditionally been the place for prostitutes to work, whether it's from in town right through to, I guess, Kilmore Street and slightly to Salisbury. Really seldom in the old days were they past that. So if we were to, it's a two-pronged attack to look at making a place more safe, where they traditionally were, to move them on, I guess. But
You're
at the moment,
right.
we haven't done anything.
That's what we're looking at doing. We're looking at disincentives in the northern part and incentives in the southern part.
Okay.
So to encourage that movement.
That we've looked at just about every conceivable way to try and do that.
Yeah.
Okay, keen to stick to questions for the moment. So Yanni and then Jimmy.
Did the committee get any advice around the future of Manchester Street across Beeley Ave? My understanding from the Accessible City program is that there's a whole bunch of streets that are going to be closed to traffic, as we've seen with Worcester Street and Fitzgerald. So, but related to Tim's question, like, it seems to me that that would naturally actually stop the issue for some, and it just seems to me like, I don't know where that's got to, but surely that's something that could be a low-cost solution.
The information that we've had from Otakaro at the moment is that the roadworks at the moment on Armagh and Manchester Street will be completed around Christmas, and that will change that link, and then further south there are more changes proposed. My understanding is that that's a prioritisation of bus lanes, and there will be islands, and it's about traffic reduction so that it's local traffic and not through traffic through that part of the road, and there will be some changes up to just south of Kilmore Street.
So sorry, let me just be a bit more eloquent in phrasing it. I'm concerned that Otakaro/Sarah are going to kind of create more traffic headaches through the areas that Tim's talking about, the non-residential area of Manchester Street, which will further push it north into the residential, even within the 4 Avs. But when we were first given the Accessible City, we were told that there's a whole bunch of streets that will be closed across Beeley, across Fitzgerald, because the idea is to have a racetrack around the outside of the 4 Avs, and that's why we slow down the traffic within the 4 Avs, is to have a racetrack around. So we've done that for some streets, but are we not aware of any plans to restrict any access across Manchester and Beeley at the moment?
Other than what I just outlined, no. But the other thing is that a lot of this is unknown. So if these things are put in place in a traffic sense that may dissuade the workers, they may like it. They may go there because it helps them. So we're not, the outcomes are all unknown at this stage. So the changes in the central city might achieve what we're hoping to achieve, to bring them further south towards the central city. It may push them out further. A lot of that is uncertain.
Okay, just a final question is, just picking up on the security and the safety, have we had any requests for additional security cameras, and have we got a program in place? I know we've got a number of security cameras in the city that we put into different places. Is that something that has been raised through this group and through this committee? And are we able to look at that as a kind of, I guess as a more urgent or short-term intervention through
Seem to be chomping at the bit to answer that one.
We had that trial camera, of course, but there are cameras on the corner, council cameras on the corner of Purchase and...
I just wonder, can we stick to the recommendations in front of us? Because a lot of this is the working group stuff.
I mean, the only relevance to questions about how infrastructure might develop and so on is how workable is what's in front of us likely to be. And I mean, the answer is the environment that we're working in could change in any number of ways, and infrastructure development could be a part of that or may not be a part of that. But we're looking at a set of regulations in front of us that create a way forward. So the relevance of any questions about the environment in which we're working really are to inform whether what we're agreeing to here is likely to be workable or not. And I mean, the answers we're getting to a lot of these questions is there are things that have been planned, but we don't know. And that's fair enough. Okay, I've got one more. Okay, let's stick to process. I've got one more question, which has been, or one more person asking questions, which is Jimmy. We'll take Jimmy's question and then we'll move to a mover and a seconder. We'll move into debate and we'll get it sorted.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is because in the regulatory performance committee meeting of last time, some of the affected residents, they make a deputation. Based on their deputation, they kind of emphasize request council develop a bylaw. It's more effective. But because due to the we consider it's non-workable and non-enforceable, so we unanimous. I also was one of committee member. Unanimous support is the non-kind of is develop a bylaw. But my question is regarding to the collaborative community working group. They have affected residents representative will be in this group. Whether one of those deputator will be in this group or not. If some other representative on their behalf, whether they are the resolution, they would like to accept those resolutions for those affected residents. This is my question.
The residents that attended for the deputations have all been approached to be involved in this process if they would like to be involved in this process. My understanding is that they are interested in being involved and seeing what will come out of it.
But they will have in this group. Okay. Thank
you. All right, so have we got a mover for the resolutions that are in front of us? Dave East. Seconded, Sarah Templeton. Okay, so this has now been moved and seconded. Dion, did you have your amendment that you wanted to put? It's up there. Approach the Ministry of Justice, to request a review of the Prostitution Reform Act 2003 to address the issue of street-based sex work in residential neighbourhood areas. Would you like to speak to your amendment? Oh yes, good point. We need a seconder for the amendment. Is there a seconder? Aaron. Okay, Dion.
Yeah, the reason I want to request the Minister or the government to actually look at this is because I believe that's actually where it probably appropriately lies when it comes to the issues that we're dealing with the residents in Christchurch. Now, I appreciate that, I mean, there's been two angles of work here. There's been the regulatory stuff and the non-regulatory, and both have been working quite hard on both issues. And I'm relatively okay with where it's got to with the non-regulatory stuff. There's some really good partnerships that have actually established, but the problem is still going to be ongoing, I believe. And if it becomes ongoing, we do need some sort of mechanisms somewhere to be able to address it. It's one of the only, I suppose, industries that doesn't have some sort of regulation. And what I think about it is actually it's about the safety of the people who are either living there or doing the work there. And actually if you can start taking away the conflict, I suppose, if you have certain areas where it's actually okay to do this activity, I think that'll be a lot better. That is where it sits, and we heard the advice from the staff that there's already a lot of work that's already been ongoing. I think one of the things that the Prostitutes Collective are quite concerned about is that some of the bills or some of the stuff that has gone to Parliament has been around recriminalising street-based sex work. I'm not saying that that's what we want to do. I want to make sure that we have tools where, if there is a problem, we do have the ability to do something about it. At the moment we don't. This has been going for 6 years. These residents are at wit's end, and now they're so sensitive to this issue. It only does take one person to upset the apple cart, and without sort of any measures that we can sort of say, hey look, this is not okay to be here, you have to go down that other side. And whether that's an instant fine or something along those lines, they may not even pay that instant fine, but it just gives us the mechanism to say, bang. But we're not actually even asking to go that stage. We're asking the Minister of Justice to, or the government to actually just look at this and say, we do have issues, and we aren't the only council that's got issues. There are a number of councils around the country. It's just because we cannot create a bylaw, and then the reason that the police are not supporting this is because if we create a bylaw, the balance of getting a prosecution, which is the only mechanism to enact this, would be very, very low because of different ways that law works, I suppose. But if we just had simple mechanisms within the Prostitution Reform Act that actually allowed us to do something, it would actually make the world a difference here. And we're not saying to criminalise it. We're not trying to advocate for, what's the word I'm looking for, to isolate street-based sex work. It's just to sort out problems when they actually come around. And actually, from my point of view, if this type of work did go ahead, we could actually create safer environments for the street-based sex work, so it actually could end up being a better for all. That's why I would like us to do that. It's only asking, but I would like us to do it.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against the amendment?
I was going to speak just the whole thing as well.
Well, maybe we should do that actually. Let's deal with the amendment first. Okay, let's deal with it. Okay, so speak to the amendment and just the matter that's raised in the amendment then in that case. Or otherwise, if you want to wait till we get to the debate on everything else, then chip in then.
Okay, well then I'll just vote on the amendment.
Yep, all right. Does anybody want to speak against the amendment? Sarah?
Can I just check understanding orders? It's really not clear in the thing here. If I speak to the amendment, am I still able to speak to substantive?
Yeah.
Thanks, sorry. It's not clear on page 56. I'm just checking before I speak.
All right. Is there anybody else who wants to speak against the amendment in the meantime? Phil? All right. Let's get an answer. Let's get a answer to the standing orders question. Yeah. And if it's at the discretion, oh, okay. So Sarah.
Okay, so I'd like to speak against the amendment. There's a couple of things here in that it's been really clear through the process to date that the behaviours that have been complained about already have legislation that covers them. It's the enforcement that's the problem. But also in the commentary around the Prostitute Reform Act, it was clear that if it became an issue, then it would probably be the Summary Offences Act that would be the most useful rather than the Prostitute Reform Act that would be the one to be changed. I don't think of all the priorities that this council has when it's talking to the government at the moment that this should be one of them, and so I'll be voting against it.
Do we have another speaker in favour of the amendment? Aaron?
I would request that all of us actually did vote for this, because I can't believe that as elected members we wouldn't review our decisions after a certain amount of time, and I expect governments to do the same. Any law that they bring in, they should review over time. Any policy, because the world changes all the time, and you can bring in policy wanting a particular outcome, and not get that outcome. So what, do you just stick with the policy and it's flawed? We've had a number of murders in the city. Those girls are not safe. Their clients are not safe. A pimp was killed as well, and that's just the bodies that have been found. Don't think that there could be some that have not been found as well when you work in that industry. It is not safe, and it is not a pleasant environment for the people that live in that neighbourhood. And this is purely just asking for a review to see if what's there is working. And if they come back and say it is, well then so be it. But it's only asking for a review. It is pretty simple, and I ask that everyone supports it because we've heard from the residents on many occasions, and I can tell you if you speak to the families of any of the victims of crime from street-based sex workers, they would probably ask for a review as well because they don't all love it.
Okay, Phil, you'd indicated you want to speak against.
Look, I don't think there's a priority. I also think that, in fact, continuing down the kind of like legislative approach that it will continue to only dissipate the other non-regulatory work that's being done. Because, in fact, there's been no real suggestions as to how this actually might work and what actually might be put in place apart from a review. So, and ultimately, the only thing that Parliament may do is make some aspect of this more of an offence, which actually involves enforcement, which so far hasn't worked. So I'm not really, I don't think this is a priority at the moment either, and I'm not going to support it.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak to this? In which case I'll put the...
Just wanted to...
There's no reply to reply on an amendment. You've already spoken. Okay. So I'll put the amendment. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. All those against, no. Can we have a show of hands? Or do you want Dion's calling for a division, so let's have a formal division.
For the amendment, Councillor Kieran?
Favour, yes.
Councillor Galloway? No. Councillor Chen?
Yes.
Councillor Davidson?
Yes.
Councillor Potter? Yes. Councillor Turner?
No.
Councillor Scandrett?
No.
Councillor Goff?
No.
Councillor Butt?
Yes.
Councillor Livingstone?
No.
Councillor East?
Yes.
Councillor Clearwater?
No.
Councillor Johansson?
No.
Councillor Swiggs?
Yes.
Councillor Templeton? No. Councillor Manji?
Yes.
The vote is tied.
So that means the status quo remains, which means the amendment's lost. So we therefore go back to the resolution as originally moved by Councillor East and Councillor Templeton. Okay, so does anybody wish to speak to the resolution as it's now going to be put? Jamie.
I'm really happy for the Working Party, I think, to take up some of the issues that Dion raised there, or those specific ones, and I think that that's best placed for it, not to thrash out at City Council. So all that, I think, is the perfect perfect place for that inter-agency Working Party to deal with, and if that involves talking with the Crown, I think they should be doing that. Anyway, going back to the substantive here, I think if you haven't read or understood the paper, you clearly couldn't do anything else but support developing a bylaw. But the fact of the matter is, if you haven't read, or if you have read and understood the paper, you truly couldn't accept anything else other than not developing a bylaw. So the advice is that it's meaningless and utterly unenforceable, creating a bylaw, and that's the crux of it. So assault, intimidation, indecent exposure, drug use, drug sales, all of this behaviour is what is problematic for the residents, understandably so. It's abhorrent. There are real laws that exist to combat this and real laws that are enforceable. The reality of the situation is that the police force find even these to enforce. So if they find real laws of the land hard to enforce in this, how a set of vague, unenforceable bylaws can be enforced is, well, an utter nonsense. So, look, I think voting for the creation of a bylaw might make people, feel good, but I think the fact of the matter is you're being really disingenuous, because we have expert staff advice that have told us very clearly that it's not going to achieve anything. The people that you would expect to enforce this have said that they will not be enforcing it and cannot enforce it. So I think that just really leaves us with the set of recommendations that we have in front of us that are recommended by staff and also the committee. But one thing that I want to make really clear is that this isn't a recommendation to do nothing. This is the recommendation that the experts are saying will achieve the outcome that we want. The experts are saying that the bylaw will not achieve that, and there is a set of recommendations up there that are saying that will. It is not the do-nothing approach. It is working collaboratively across the board with a whole host of different agencies that actually have clout in this area to try and get positive change. So it's not the easy option, because I would love nothing more than to just vote willy-nilly to create a bylaw, but deep down know that it achieves absolutely nothing. That's wasting time, that's wasting money, and it's giving false hope, and that just makes a joke of the entire situation. But there is a set of recommendations that all experts and people that are actually going to be enforcing the laws are saying is the way to address it if we want to actually change the situation. So I think we've got something quite pragmatic and sensible in front of us, and I urge you to support the set of recommendations. And also, in light of what Dion raised, I think it's all really valid stuff for that interagency working group to take up with the Crown, but the place for that is in that working party and not here at Council.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. I've got to say, Jamie's right. You know, there's this waste of time and money and resources, and it's been that way for the last 5 months, since the 25th of May, when it was very clear, even on the 25th of May, that a bylaw wasn't going to work. People voted to look at a bylaw because they were hopeful, they wanted to give people hope, but that has been wasted hope, and it's meant that for the last 5 months the interagency working group has looked at a bylaw option and wasted its time on that when it could have been spent looking at all of the other options that have been canvassed around the table today. And we've heard already that it has, you know, in the last couple of weeks since the police have said that they wouldn't enforce it, which they said at the time would be difficult anyway, that there has been progress made. And I wish that we had started that 5 months ago on the 25th of May. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. This has been a difficult and challenging matter to address, as many of you will appreciate, and I suspect if one of us was Matt Bonnis and also a city councillor, we'd want the council to do something. But I began from a regulatory position. I've shifted. It's just not quite hitting the threshold of a city-wide problem vis-a-vis freedom camping, so that more than met the criteria, in my view, for developing or bringing out stronger aspects of that bylaw. We've had a go at looking at the public places policy, but then again proving a transaction was problematic, and in fact a transaction doesn't always take place. As we heard, some are gratis, they're known as charity. There again, it's difficult. I'm hoping that we can still, though, call on the resources across our program of work in the council to do something in the homelessness space, for instance, and we heard that many working on the streets are homeless. I'm hoping that we can address some issues there. You'll notice in the Act that the only kind of explicit reference to protection is to protection of those working on the street surrounding, around their benefits. WINS was probably a kinder organisation back then than it has become lately, but I'm hopeful with a change of government that it will, have the doors open a bit more to our people. So I hope that we can be proactive and provide other options by which people can actually make a living and live safely. But we can't underestimate how difficult this is.
All right, great, thank you. I'll just take some advice here for a moment and then we'll continue. Great, apologies for that. Mike.
Thank you. I will be supporting the resolution up there. I guess, look, I don't think it's acceptable that residents actually have to live with a lot of nuisance outside their properties where they obviously sleep and it's causing disruption, no matter what the activity is. But look, what I hear is obviously the police do have the tools, they're just lacking the resources. And while we heard all the deputations from the residents, one of the person advocating them for them was Duncan Webb. Well, he's now in government, so I suggest he actually go talk to the Minister of Police to have a look at that angle if he's so concerned with the residents in there, because I am concerned, but obviously what we know is we just cannot achieve it through creating a bylaw. So I suggest that actually Duncan Webb have a chat to the new Minister of Police.
Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, because in the regulatory, the performance committee, I support another developed bylaw, but today the decision still remains the same. But except the previous one, I would like to explain later on, because I consider whether the bylaw, if we develop, is workable, is enforceable, or is implementable. This is quite in the committee meeting quite clearly, based on the submission, based on the staff, the written information and the oral interpretation, as well as the police and some other different agencies, the information quite clearly. So that's why probably non-bylaw is better than bylaw in current situation. Second is we develop a collaborative community working group. Actually, it's cover all of the group under the one great umbrella. Every the group are all in scope. Then take a positive way. At least it's a mutual, constructive communication. But some of the affected residents, they're concerned whether because they done before, but that before is different from the new one, because based on the staff they mentioned earlier, actually they still cover like except the police, they still cover some other like community public health or some other group will get involved, can give a more constructive the idea, etc. The other one is if we review this information, it looks like you would take a more kind of a better, constructive, positive way they will drop. If we review, if the recent months, we can drop from original 16 to up to now maybe only 3 or 4, but this information 1 or 2. So that's quite effective through this the kind of the working group, I assume. But why I support the previous one? We need to separate the short term and the long term. My view, this one, if we take a positive way, probably short term we can deal in this issue. However, I'm still concerned the long term, because the the sex workers, they are not always in there. They are not always the same person in there, same people in there. Probably they still, have a new face, new one in there. Whether they are aware this kind of situation is my concern. And also the council were eligible to request the central government, whether you also should consider, take a positive way, review your original act. It's back to the 2003, but up to now has been 14 years. So these are the privilege. So that's why I support the people. But I don't think so. This short-term and long-term have any contradict or any conflict. I don't think so. Should be the simultaneous. At the same time, we can request. That's my view.
Aaron.
Yeah, I'll just speak quickly, and I'd ask if you could put number 1 separately, and then all the rest all the same. So I would urge everyone to not support not doing a bylaw. I think we should be doing the bylaw, and because I look at all the others and the continue to work together, excuse the pun, touchy-feely type stuff that's gone on. That's happened since months after the February quake. It started in like June of 2011 to try and encourage them to move, so on and so forth. There is no power. It is absolute rubbish that it's unenforceable. If you have a bylaw that says you cannot do something in a particular area, like drive your car or park it or stand there and sell street prostitution, then you can't do it there. There'll be a little bit of signage, and the police can just use it easily as a tool to say, please move along. That's all. They don't have to arrest people or get rid of them. It just gives them a tool to say, don't work in this area. In fact, I believe the girls themselves would see the signs and move on. They wouldn't even stay there because they wouldn't want to be hassled. And when you say it's too hard to enforce or to work out, you'll find that when they want to work out if someone's selling alcohol to underages, they do mufti stings. It's pretty darn easy, and I'm sure you'll find someone who will dress in mufti and go along and ask a girl if he can buy a particular service on a street in Manchester, and if they say yes, then they can say, oh, you've breached the bylaw. It's not that hard, let's be honest.
Thank you. I'm going to vote in favour of this. I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this by staff and by the committee, and on that basis we've got the recommendation in front of us not to develop a bylaw. There is no point whatsoever in developing a bylaw for the sake of doing that if it's going to be unenforceable or if it's not going to have any effect. And of course that's on the basis that we would decide to create a bylaw even if we could, and that's a debate all of its own. So my view is that what we've got here is a collaborative partnership approach that we need to give the best possible chance of working. The clauses 5 and 6 in the recommendations in front of us really, I think, do that. We've got monitoring and evaluation and quarterly reporting back to the committee. That'll pick up any issues or any opportunities on that quarterly basis. And 6, you know, obviously that's another way. Funding is another way, or considering funding is another way that we can support positive outcomes in what we hope will be a productive collaborative space. I'll come to you, Dave, to close the debate, and then we'll take a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'd just like to open my address by just reiterating how incredibly sensitive, somewhat divisive and very difficult this situation has been to resolve, and also acknowledge the difficulties that the local residents have had to endure. I'd also like to acknowledge the supreme amount of work that Tina particularly has put into this piece of work, ably supported by Judith and Helen. It's been an incredible piece of work that they've had to put together. Obviously, I'm going to support this motion before us, and I would have supported Dion's, well, I did support Dion's motion before, but I then think to points that Councillor Livingston raised, that really although in the long term, even if the Act was changed and we did have some mechanism to be able to enforce it to a degree, there is still always that problem of how do you actually confirm that a transaction is or has taken place. It's so pretty difficult to actually define that part of the whole equation. And I'd like to also pick up on points that Councillor Davidson raised about the police having tools that they can address certain aspects at the moment, and I certainly in my opening address suggested that if the police were to have an intensive presence in the area for a reasonable amount of time, that would probably move the problem on as well. But having said that, I'm also totally supportive of the collaborative community working group approach as well. I think, you know, in the society we live in today, coming down with the big stick approach is not always the best solution to solve a problem, and if we can collectively address the issues and move the problem along in the long run, that's probably better than trying to take a legislative approach and to curb this issue. So I will ask that everyone support the resolution that we have here before us today. It's been the culmination of a lengthy period of work, some of which, as Sarah Templeton addressed earlier, it's been work that we've carried on for a long time, only at the death knock to have it kicked back because we can't have the tools to adequately enforce it. So this has been going on for a long, long time now. It's not the ideal situation that local residents are looking for, but it's not the end to the problem either. We are still working forward, and I have some confidence that the approach that we are embarking on now has the potential to actually give us some positive outcomes. So on that note, I'd invite you to put the motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. It's been a good debate, and I'll now, as requested, put clause 1 first, separately. So this is just clause 1. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Do you want those recorded? Yep. So councillors Keown and Swiggs against. Was there anybody else against? So if we can just note that. And now I'll put the remaining clauses. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you.